Alright, this was the last section in chapter 1, so this is when we were describing things. Alright, so remember we talked about the mean. Just remember the notation here. The sample mean is x bar. Obviously, I think you remember how to find that. Add up all the observations, divide by n. Alright, another common measure of the center is the median. So the median is the middle. You can do it by hand. Remember, we did on our calculator. So here's some data set. That's the data set I have in my calculator. There's the actual mean. There's a stem and leaf plot, and there's the median. So remember, the faster way to find that is when you're in your calculator. I'm going to go back to my main screen. I'm using the same data that I'm using in this PowerPoint. So I already put it in my list. So remember how to enter that into your list. You go to Stat, you go to Edit, you press Enter. There's all the data right there. I've already typed it all in. So when I want to get all those summary statistics, I'm just going to go to Stat. I go over to Calculate. I hit that 1var stats. I'm going to tell it to do 1var stats of list 1. And I'm going to press Enter. So the x bar, there's my mean, the 31.25, which is the same number they had over here. And then if I scroll down, there's my median, that 22.5. So just use your calculator to find those numbers. As you know, they measure center in different ways. Remember, when a distribution is roughly symmetric, the mean and median are close together. If it's perfectly symmetric, they would be exactly the same. If the distribution is skewed, the mean is usually farther out in the tail. So if it's right skewed, the mean would be further out in the right. If it's left skewed, the mean would be further out in the left. We also talked about IQR. So it's just the measure of the middle 50%. So first thing we did was we found the quartiles. So remember, the first quartile, 25% of the values are below it. The third quartile at 75% below it. The IQR is Q3 minus Q1. Alright, this is that same data set. It goes through an example. So the median is going to be in here. Q1 is going to be in here, and the Q1's here. Now, again, use your calculator. So there's my Q1 right there, that 15. And there's my Q3, 42.5. So those are the same numbers there. And remember, the IQR is just the difference between those two. So you take that difference there, that's the IQR. And it just gives you an idea of the range of the middle half of the times. Alright, remember, I just talked about this in the other video, but when you're talking about outliers, there's that rule, the 1.5 times the IQR rule for the outliers. So we had, this was the IQR for that data. We multiply it times 1.5, and then you take that number and you subtract it from Q1 and you add it to Q3. So anything less than this number is an outlier. Anything greater than that number is an outlier. So in this data set right here, obviously we had no negative commuting times, but 85 is bigger than that, so 85 would be considered an outlier. So just remember that 1.5 times the IQR rule. Alright, the 5-number summary was something that was helpful for the box plot. So the 5-number summary was the minimum Q1, the median Q3, and the maximum. And again, just get those numbers directly from that 1var stats in your calculator. Don't bother calculating them by hand. Once you have those numbers, then you could create your box plot. So you have a number line. The box goes from Q1 to Q3. Make a line for the median. Extend the lines from the box out to the minimum maximum values that are not outliers. Again, so that kind of goes through this. So the highest value that's not an outlier in this direction is 65. That's why it's stopping. Again, I wouldn't bother worrying about doing it by hand. If you go to second y equals, turn that plot on. If I pick the box plot that has the little dots next to it, remember, leave it at L1. That's where my data is. Leave the frequency at 1. The mark, pick whatever mark you like. I'm going to hit that zoom 9 again. And then if I hit the trace button, it'll actually show me. So there's the 5. There's the Q1. There's the median, Q3. There's that 65, which is the highest value that's not an outlier. And there's the outlier. So just do it on the calculator. All right, we talked about spread. With this one here, they're going through a different example in this PowerPoint. Basically, remember, we're trying to find out how far away each value is from the mean. So we go ahead and do that. You figure out how far away is. You square those values. You add them all up. Divide it by n minus 1. The first thing you get is the variance. And then when you take the square root, you get the standard deviation. Again, so the standard deviation, which this book uses SX, measures the average distance of the observations from their mean. It's calculated by finding an average of the squared distances and taking the square root. This average squared distance is called the variance. So you're figuring out how far away each value is from the mean, you're squaring it, adding them all up, dividing it by n minus 1. Don't worry so much again about doing that by hand. You shouldn't, even though it's on the formula sheet, you should not have to do it by hand. Go to your 1-var stats. So there's remember this SX is my sample standard deviation, so it's the 21.8773495. If I wanted the variance to the S squared, all I'd have to do is take that number and square it. So whatever that number was. Let's see here. So it was a different number. Sorry. Another way I can get it is I can go to these vars. I can go to the statistics variables. That 3 is right. Number 3 is the standard deviation. So there's that number there, and I could just square it. And there's my variance. Okay, that's my SX squared. And usually, more often than not, we're always using the standard deviation. All right, to decide if you're going to, so if you're describing a distribution, you need to pick between the mean and standard deviation or the median and the IQR. Just remember that the median and IQR would be your choices if the distribution is skewed or has outliers. Otherwise, if the distribution is reasonably symmetric, use the mean and standard deviation. Remember, numerical summaries do not fully describe, always plot the data. So here's the summary if you want to read through that. But that takes us through Chapter 1.